We Great. So, just to kick off, many people obviously will be familiar with your work with the Comets Coming and possibly Soccer 96 as well.
Mhm.
What, how would you see the differences between these projects and what you're doing in a solo capacity now?
Um, well, I guess I'm playing all the instruments now, so it's been like kind of like a dream to do that, but also like a real challenge because you kind of you have all the frequencies to play with, you know. Um, and I guess it's before, you know, you have when you collaborate with people, they bring unexpected things to the session. You might play something and you have no idea what someone's going to bring. But on your own, you know exactly what you're going to bring because it's just you, you know? So that's the major difference is just trying to um, kind of make the landscape of your mind, you know, but and trying to keep it almost like you're collaborating with yourself, you know. Um, so you're kind of adding elements of random stuff in there just to keep yourself, you know, on your toes. I don't know if that's a very good answer actually, but
No,
there's similarities in the kind of yeah, in the kind of sound palette, I guess, with the synths that I play, and yeah, and then differences in some you could say like the intention of it's a little bit different on this record, I think. It's a bit more emotionally driven, I reckon, this record. And I try to be
sure.
as like vulnerable as I possibly could. So yeah, maybe it's a bit more reflective and a bit less on the front foot or something.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that definitely comes across. But what you were saying as well, you were like, I'm not sure if that's a very good answer. I think you sort of touched on something really interesting there, I think, which you actually reminded me as you were talking of an interview I once read with Brian Eno, where he was talking about kind of the fact that how much he loves kind of producing music and working in his own little bubble, but he misses the kind of unexpected and the random kind of happenings that come up with
mhm.
like playing with a band and how he sort of challenges himself to surprise himself by
Mm,
throwing in unexpected things or putting something down and cutting it a
yeah,
very different way. And the way you were kind of talking about it then just kind of reminded me
yeah,
of that.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, there's a
but
good like one example I would say is there's this sound that I got on this track called Mobius Triptych, and the Juno was the main synth of it, and I found this effect that kind of glitched so randomly that you couldn't determine what it's really going to do, and you can just like tweak this knob basically, and it just kind of sent it on these mad cascading sounds, and it just really excites me now. I can still listen to it and remember doing that and be like, oh, it was just yeah, it had that chaotic random quality that very exciting. Um,
sure, sure. So, can you tell me a little bit? So kind of moving on from that, can you tell me a little bit about your production process, how you approached the project with teleportations and what you wanted to achieve with it?
yeah, I think. Similarly to in my bands, I just like to play for a very long period of time on sessions until I've kind of like lost myself a bit and I've lost my conscious mind a bit because you know you can overthink what you're doing or sometimes you can think, oh, what scene is this or what genre is this? Like you overthinking it and like how is my mates gonna respond to this? And like you have all these kind of I don't know if everyone has that, but after I normally find after a few days of working on something and really hiding myself away, I can suddenly start to like touch on something that feels really like meaningful and true, like you know. And so yeah, all the tracks are kind of from different sessions, I think, but they Um, they're normally quite like deep into it, and then I normally track a load of jams onto tape. And then much later, I try and put them away in a drawer so I forget that they exist. And then after a few months, I pull them back out, and then it's like you're listening to someone else. You like listening to a
Mm.
different artist, and you're trying to produce that artist. And then I go into the next phase, which is a phase of chopping and reassembling and editing. And then I will do some more recording on top of that, almost like the backing track. And then so yeah, I kind of it's like different stages of it, and you're kind of cooking it down a bit like a meal, or kind of like editing the album together like a movie. So I had lots of stuff that it hit the cutting room floor, and then I was just trying to assemble something that kind of had some kind of narrative sense to me. Um, um, so yeah, it's like a combination of improvisation and carefreeness, and then a kind of a period of more precise or more what's the word? Discerning kind of critical editing and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah. So is that when you're doing that, you're operating in kind of two very different headspaces with that, right? And
Yeah.
so and key to that, as you were saying, is that kind of feeling of almost giving yourself some distance so you are looking kind of more objectively as if it is another artist or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that. I think Charles Bukowski used to do that. He said he used to write loads of stuff, the whole like, um, just free flowing stream of consciousness. And then he said, "Oh, I just put it in a drawer for 6 months." And then so when I pull it back out, I've forgotten everything. And then you're reading it like for the first time, like it's a different writer. And I think I read that about 20 years ago. So I've done that with all the albums we record, and then I don't put it in a drawer. I mean, sometimes I do. If it's on a tape
Yeah,
or hard drive,
the
like kind of
metaphorical draw.
the metaphorical drawer, it can be a shelf. But yeah, I really like that because it gives you a little bit of distance, and a little bit more. Um, I know sometimes you can really not like something you've recorded, and it turns out you love it later on, or
Yeah.
you really think something's brilliant, and then you listen back, and you're like, actually, that's not very good. And sometimes I find a bit of
Yeah.
time can really help with that, I think.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I'm kind of like that with things I've written that I think, oh, I was really happy with that, and
Mm.
then come to that back to it and think, what was I thinking? But yeah,
Yeah.
um, so uh, yeah, so just like moving on from there, just kind of coming back to kind of you as like a solo artist, was producing an album in this way, and I suppose following a singular vision of yours rather than uh, part of a larger group or whatever. Was that
Yeah.
something you've been wanting to do for a while, a path you've been aiming to kind of go down?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of my synth heroes have made singular records, whether it be Terry Riley or Laurie Spiegel or even like someone like Alan Vega just doing like his solo record. Or yeah, Eno that you mentioned there, or Rodelius and all the Berlin School guys, of krautrock or kosmische music or whatever you want to call it. So like it's this crazy Jan Hammer record based on like the first 7 days on the planet and stuff. There's just so many of them. And I collect kind of records like that, and I love
Mm.
going into shops and trying to find a new kind of solo synth record, with
Yeah,
ideally
yeah,
with some kind of cosmic front cover. And I just wanted to almost like I've enjoyed taking so much enjoyment and from listening to those records. I just wanted to put something back into that cycle, really. And um, yeah, there's something about the synth kind of orchestra or making an orchestrating a sound palette with lots of different synth sounds. Like Tomita, that Japanese guy would reorchestrate, or like Wendy Carlos, they'd reorchestrate classical pieces on different synth sounds. And something about that is really attractive to me. It just feels really like a fun thing to do. But yeah, but to make a whole synth world, yeah, it has been a real kind of dream of mine, and it just took, my band breaking up basically and having a bit more headspace. Because producing the Comet records was a lot in terms of like the
Yeah, I
headspace
can imagine.
and just the touring as well. So it's just come at a perfect time really, where we just had a bit more headspace in the studio. Yeah.
Sure. No, no, that all makes a lot of sense. So it it can feel a bit like a cliche to use the word journey about an album, but I think
Yeah,
it's quite appropriate here. It's one of those words that I was thinking about what I was going to ask you, and I was like, that's
I
such a
know.
kind of cliched word that I don't like very much, but
I know.
I don't have a better alternative.
One of my
Unless it's
mates the other day said called it a traveler, which was similar but like it's slightly different. But it kind of
yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
slip off the tongue as easy. He was like, it's a real
No, indeed.
traveler.
No, I think that works. But yeah, I think that does, whether the album's a traveler or whether the whole thing is a journey, I think it's quite appropriate here. Because obviously it's all kind of linked ideas that kind of flow into each other and make a cohesive whole. And you've talked about already creating like a kind of synth world. Can you just tell me a bit about the sort of the concepts and ideas that went into creating that world?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think I often make things in reverse. So rather than willfully kind of constructing it, I kind of just made music and then it almost reveals itself. It's more like a process of like digging like or yeah, underground and finding stuff. It's like um but in making records like that, I guess yeah, that moment of deciding which are the pieces of music you're going to keep and how they relate to one another or respond to each other, that process you have more control. And I think in that process, sometimes, in the past, I might have been like, oh, what's tune's got the most banging beat, or which tune's got like the filthiest riff, or that kind of thing. And then for this record, I decided to make my guiding principle um, just emotion and how I felt while I was listening to it, and and how kind of I know I try to make it as vulnerably honest and emotional as possible, basically. So some of the tracks, would still be giving me goosebumps even on the final mix down, um, and so I just wanted to cut everything away, basically, apart from like the emotional side of it, and I also didn't really want the record to have too much like I wanted it to keep moving. So there's like not there's hardly any like loops in it. It kind of keeps changing and morphing over time, and I wanted tracks to feel like arrival points. So there might be moments in the record where it feels more meandering, and then when you arrive at certain tracks, it's like, oh, that's why I was on that winding path because I had to get to here, and I think I was trying to relate that back to my own emotional state and my own kind of like life in general has those kind of moments where you're like, where am I? What am I doing? I'm
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of swimming to stay alive. And then suddenly, bang, you arrive at this new phase of your life where you're like, oh, I needed to go through that in order to become the next version of myself. So I was trying, I know it sounds a tiny bit like lofty, but that was just how I was thinking about it while I was doing it. It was just like, can I represent this kind of map of my mind through the tracks and so yeah, so all of the tracks have quite a big meaning to me, and I won't go into it necessarily because I want people to listen to it on their own terms, but yeah, it's all kind of constructed as a kind of emotional uh therapeutic process essentially. Um
Sure.
but that possibly sounds weird, but it's just it sounds weird
No,
coming
no,
out
no,
of my mouth, but it's the truth.
no, I get you where you're coming from with that. Um, So there's like a really strong like science fiction element and kind of influence on the
Hmm.
record from like the track titles to the artwork and kind of running through it. Can you tell me a bit more about that aspect of your work?
Yeah, for sure. Um, I kind of there's this kind of philosopher, this Marxist philosopher called Ernst Bloch, and he talks about like imagination, and he doesn't quite talk about sci-fi, but he talks about the idea of imagined worlds and how even if an imagined world, I think he references dwarves and pixies and elves and things like that because it was writing quite a while ago, but you're saying in it might seem trite or like a playful thing, but actually in imagining worlds you're playing with the bit of your mind that can construct like a new future. So I think sci-fi has always done very well at that, like projecting forward a few hundred or a few thousand years as a in sci-fi you can kind of like rectify some things that you'd hope would have changed by that point in time. So sci-fi has always been kind of fascinating to me because it's a way you can imagine like a new future. Um, and I think if you just stop imagining stuff, then there's no hope, because you're just taking the world as is given to you in all of its like wrongs and horrors. So somehow science fiction, although, it's fun and there's like ray guns and, robots and,
Yeah,
you know, like control panels on spaceships bleeping and blopping. There's also like a kind of deeper kind of meaning to it, which is like very human. It's this kind of search for a kind of a better way of doing things, or a kind of could be more collective, or it could be more using technology for good rather than, you know, AI targeting warfare and that kind of awful
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
that's happening at the moment. So I think, yeah, so rather than a form of escapism, I just see it as a form of exercising your imagination,
Mm.
um, which, yeah, I kind of, yeah, I'm trying to do that as much as I can.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah. No, you're the way you were kind of conceptualizing that then it reminded me from the other direction of some of the things that Mark Fisher wrote about before he
mhm,
sadly passed away. That he obviously talked about like the state we're in now and the kind of capitalist realism where our current situation has sort of made itself the seem like the only viable way of doing things so that the imagination is almost curtailed. And then he talked about kind of coming
mhm,
past that and ways of getting past it. It seemed like, yeah, the way you were talking about
mhm,
imagination was like looking at the same thing from the other end, as it were.
mhm,
Um, yeah. So just like moving on from there, you've touched a bit on some of your influences and like throughout the album there's a really broad range of influences that come
mhm,
through from like uh jazz tronica through to ambient stuff. You touched on like
mhm,
the Berlin school. There's quite obviously quite a sort of a large dose of that kind of stuff as well.
mhm.
Was it your intention to kind of bring together this range of influences, or is that just something that comes out naturally as you compose and work?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it just kind of comes out naturally. I definitely could have made an album that was more genre cohesive, almost like with all the material that I had. Um, you know, but like one track in particular on it's called On to the Next, or I think I ended up calling it On to the Next Dimension. But that one is so different from the rest of the album. But in a way, when I placed it down, where I put it, which was right near the end of the album, um, you couldn't have put it probably next to the first track of the album. It wouldn't have made any sense. But to me, it felt like coming out of all the emotional process. So I saw that track as a celebration. That track was just like, we made it, you made it through all this stuff you've just been processing. And we've landed at this track, and now it's like, now you could just like, let your hair down a bit and just like you made it almost to the end of the album. And so it's almost like I was thinking it more like what it meant in terms of like the story rather than what genre it was. And I do tend to think a bit like that, which, people with comics come in, they call it, genre defying and stuff like that. But, you know, sometimes it's just because, but that wasn't really the modality we're thinking in. We're more thinking in terms of like the relationship between the sounds and um, but yeah, I will say one day it's a dream of mine to make a more kind of cohesive kind of genre album, and stop being so multi-personality disorder. But yeah, it's just it's just yeah, I kind of was thinking of it really like a film and just making different scenes happen, like vignettes
Yeah, yeah.
almost of different places in
But
my mind.
it's very the album's very coherent and very cohesive, and I think I think because of the way it kind of moves and the different tracks kind of like bleed into each other and stuff. It sort
Mm,
of it doesn't feel like you're suddenly like really disjointed or like I was over there and why am
mm,
I over here now? To me, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting what you're saying there because I think there's often quite and I say this as someone who does music journalism. I think there's
mm,
often quite a disconnect between the way artists conceive of things or the way they're like
mm,
working and then the kind of like descriptions that get manufactured or kind of
mm.
attached to the
Yeah.
music by like critics and writers, some of
Mm,
which can be helpful and some of which can be less so in that
hmm
like over genrefying things and creating
mm.
subgenres of subgenres. I try and avoid doing
Right. Okay.
when
Yeah.
when I write, which I think it can just get you too far from the original intention of like
Mm,
of the music and yeah. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, I've just got a couple more questions for you.
okay.
And one thing, even though obviously quite a lot of the album is quite pulsive, or there's some quite big beats on it and things, but I also feel there's quite an aspect of ambient music having influenced it. I mean, the opening tracks before you kind of
hmm
the first couple of tracks in particular, and then there are some very sort of layers of ambient sound at other
hmm
points. So I just wanted to ask what the influence of kind of ambient music and ambient artists has been on you artistically and on this record.
Yeah. Um, I think I've reached for ambient music a lot when touring as a almost like a tool for kind of soothing my soul in a way, like being
I get that.
on a plane for the millionth time after like 3 hours sleep and probably being hungover or whatever, and you can just be like, right, I've got an 8 hour journey today. Um, Having being wrapped up in a blanket of sound and some headphones, it just that has saved my li absolute life on a number of occasions. Um, so. I think coming out at the end of touring, especially with a really hectic, propulsive, energetic band, it was kind of like not only did I want to kind of go the other way a little bit with my writing and see what other parts of myself I could explore, but I had all this influence from all of this listening and going into that deep space. And again, just wanting to like give something back to that space. I think of music almost like, like a living organism. And if it's given me something that's really moved me or helped me or guided me, I want to almost like f feed something back into that kind of feedback cycle of that sound.
Mm,
In a kind of romantic way, I see music as like almost like like a partner, and I want to like give something back in that way. So yeah, I think that's kind of my thinking on it, and also I just quite like the idea of if you're going to be really propulsive and have some, you know, drum machine slapping kick drums, it feels even more impactful sometimes if that's coming after something
Mm.
that's really kind of like kind of a soundscape or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
And I guess also, yeah, just one more thing. I guess just by not being in a band with a drummer, I mean, it's hard to ask a drummer just not to play on a track, isn't it, when you're in a band? So it's kind of nice to kind of play with. There's a track on there called "Arrival at Row" off Yuki, and it's just a dreamy melody and an orchestrated synth kind of soundscape, and yeah, no drums. And I was just also like just thrilled to try some stuff with no drums.
yeah,
With
yeah,
all greatest respect to my best mate Betamax, who's one of the best drummers in the world. But yeah, I just had to explore that. Yeah,
yeah. No, I can imagine there's something as much as obviously I listen to like loads of jazz and electronica and various other
yeah,
genres and have huge respect for for drummers. And but yeah, there is something about how kind of freeing stuff that is more amorphous and
mm,
soundscape
mm,
based is
hmm
yeah, towards the end of last year I interviewed Lawrence English for Juno Daily. I don't
hmm
do you know his
No, I
work?
don't. Let me
Yeah.
write that down. Yeah,
He's
Lawrence English.
Lawrence English. He's Australian ambient artist. He did an
Hmm
album with an American guy called Stephen Vitiello, who's done a
hmm
few albums. He did a an album last year called Trinity, where each track, it's the two of them, and
Yeah.
each track has a guest from often very different styles of music. But no,
Uh-huh.
he was someone I interviewed last year and is a really interesting artist. He's worked with William Basinski and people like that quite a
hmm
lot. And
hmm
but no, just hearing him talk about um the way he views sounds and just how freeing it is to create things that are very amorphous and also that don't come with very much expectation that can
hmm
just kind of exist and allow people to interpret them. But no, like
hmm
no, he's a really interesting artist. Before I distract myself more, the
hmm
last thing I was going to ask you, you've got a number of like live dates coming up, and
hmm
what can people expect from your live shows?
Um, well, I've been collaborating with a visual artist called Inner Strings,
Okay,
who
cool.
I've loved for years, and so it's quite um, immersive in terms of the visuals. It's using cameras and audio triggers to kind of create a kind of visual feedback with me, and also his mad analog visual setup, which is amazing. I think it's all hardware. I bring the full kit. In fact, yeah, the live setup's just behind me there. You've got the
Yeah, yeah.
Juno and SH9 and 808 and uh 101 and maybe 303 if I can bring that as well. But yeah, I'm just kind of using all analog hardware, tweaking it on the fly. It's kind of I'm trying to mess with AI basically, and still do everything human, and probably getting lots of bits wrong, which I love about doing it. Yeah, it's so on the fly that sometimes whole crazy things happen, but they normally end up being my favorite bit of the gig because you have to find a way to, surf
Yeah.
on that wave. Um, and it's very high energy, like more so than the album. I love making really high energy. Once I'm with the big sound system or the speakers, I just I want to get some energy in the room, and I've actually been pretty disastrous at trying to play the more ambient tracks live. I just
Okay.
um yeah, I think if I say had a show at the Barbican or something or a sit down thing, I would. But if I'm in a club or something like that, I just I err towards the more uh beat driven thing. So actually, there's quite a lot of the set that's not on the album that I'm just
Okay.
writing new stuff around the live set, which will be on the next album. So it's but there's about half and half, I'd say. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Anyway, that's all my questions. So I'm just gonna stop recording.